When potential running mates start measuring their words more carefully around the presumptive nominee, political observers know something fundamental has shifted. Recent reports suggest several figures on Trump's vice presidential shortlist are quietly reassessing not just their political futures, but their legal exposure. What we're witnessing isn't just the typical dance of vice presidential selection. It's a recalibration of political survival instincts that could fundamentally reshape how the Republican ticket takes form in 2024. If you've been following the traditional patterns of vice presidential vetting, you know the process usually revolves around electoral math, fundraising capacity, and policy complementarity. Potential candidates typically compete to demonstrate their loyalty and their ability to deliver key demographics or swing states. But according to multiple sources familiar with current discussions, the conversations happening in private have taken on a distinctly different tone. Legal analysts suggest that for the first time in modern political history, potential running mates are reportedly consulting constitutional scholars and criminal defense attorneys as part of their decision-making process. The shift becomes apparent when you examine the public statements and scheduling patterns of figures who were once eager to appear alongside Trump at every opportunity. Political observers note that several governors and senators who actively sought Trump's endorsement just months ago are now choosing their words with lawyerly precision. They're still supportive, but the enthusiastic, unqualified endorsements have given way to more measured language about following constitutional processes and respecting legal proceedings. This isn't necessarily about personal loyalty wavering. According to longtime Republican operatives, many of these potential candidates remain personally committed to Trump and his political movement. What's changed is their understanding of the institutional risks involved in accepting a position on a ticket where the presidential nominee faces multiple criminal prosecutions. Legal experts point out that while the vice presidency itself carries certain constitutional protections, the path to that office can expose candidates to scrutiny they may not have anticipated. Consider what vice presidential vetting traditionally involves. Opposition research teams scrutinize decades of financial records, personal relationships, and public statements. But in this cycle, according to those familiar with the process, potential running mates are being advised to conduct their own legal review before even entering formal consideration. The question isn't just whether they can survive Democratic attacks during a general election. It's whether they can navigate the complex legal landscape that surrounds the presidential nominee without compromising their own standing. The constitutional dimension adds another layer of complexity that political strategists are still working through. Legal scholars note that the 25th Amendment provides mechanisms for vice presidential succession, but the political and legal implications of those mechanisms in the context of ongoing criminal proceedings remain largely untested. If a presidential nominee were to face conviction after the selection of a running mate but before the general election, the constitutional path forward would likely involve unprecedented legal and political maneuvering. This uncertainty is reportedly influencing how potential candidates are approaching their own political calculations. Sources suggest that several figures who might otherwise eagerly accept a vice presidential nomination are instead focusing on their own electoral prospects and long-term political viability. The mathematical reality is stark. Accepting a position on a legally compromised ticket could potentially damage careers that might otherwise survive and thrive in a post-Trump Republican Party. The institutional implications extend beyond individual political careers. Constitutional experts suggest that the current situation is testing the resilience of American democratic institutions in ways that the founders likely didn't anticipate. The intersection of criminal prosecution and presidential politics creates constitutional gray areas that could require resolution by the Supreme Court or through unprecedented political arrangements. For the Trump campaign, this creates a strategic dilemma that goes beyond traditional running mate selection. Campaign officials need to identify candidates who can not only help win the election, but who are also willing to accept the legal and political risks that come with the territory. According to political analysts, this has effectively narrowed the field of potential candidates to those whose own political futures are already closely tied to Trump's success or failure. The donor class is watching these calculations closely. Major Republican fundraisers reportedly view the vice presidential selection as a key indicator of the campaign's long-term viability. A running mate who appears reluctant or overly cautious could signal to major donors that even Trump's closest allies harbor doubts about the ticket's prospects. Conversely, a running mate who embraces the risks could reassure donors that the campaign retains confidence in its legal and political strategy. The timing of the selection process adds another complicating factor. Traditional political wisdom suggests announcing a running mate closer to the party convention to maximize media impact and maintain campaign momentum. But legal experts note that the ongoing criminal proceedings could force an earlier decision if legal developments require immediate political responses. The campaign may need a fully formed ticket earlier than anticipated to weather potential legal storms. State-level Republican officials are also factoring these dynamics into their own electoral calculations. Governors and senators who might otherwise compete for national attention are reportedly more focused on their own re-election prospects and their ability to distance themselves from potential negative developments. This creates a feedback loop where the pool of attractive vice presidential candidates continues to shrink as legal uncertainties persist. The media landscape further complicates the selection process. Potential running mates know they'll face intense scrutiny not just about their qualifications and policy positions, but about their willingness to defend or deflect questions about the nominee's legal troubles. This requires a specific skill set and temperament that may not align with traditional vice presidential attributes like foreign policy expertise or economic credentials. International observers are also watching how American political institutions handle this unprecedented situation. Allied nations that rely on American leadership and stability are reportedly concerned about the potential for constitutional crises that could affect global political and economic relationships. The vice presidential selection is seen as one indicator of how the American political system will manage the intersection of legal accountability and democratic governance. The implications for Republican Party unity are significant. If potential running mates appear hesitant or conditional in their support, it could create visible cracks in party solidarity that Democratic opponents would certainly exploit. Party officials reportedly worry that a drawn-out or contentious vice presidential selection process could overshadow policy messaging and allow opponents to frame the Republican ticket as chaotic or unstable. Looking ahead, the resolution of this vice presidential calculation will likely serve as a bellwether for broader Republican Party dynamics. Political analysts suggest that the willingness of prominent Republicans to accept a position on the ticket will signal how the party establishment views Trump's long-term prospects and legal vulnerabilities. A reluctant or limited field of candidates could indicate deeper institutional concerns about the nominee's viability. The precedent being set here will likely influence future American politics regardless of the immediate electoral outcome. Constitutional scholars note that the current situation is establishing new norms around how criminal prosecutions intersect with presidential campaigns. Future candidates and political parties will likely reference this moment when developing their own strategies for managing legal challenges while pursuing elected office. What we're witnessing isn't just a political calculation about electoral strategy or policy alignment. It's a fundamental test of how American democratic institutions adapt when faced with unprecedented circumstances. The vice presidential selection process has become a window into how political figures balance personal ambition, institutional loyalty, and constitutional responsibility when those interests potentially conflict. Whether this recalibration ultimately strengthens or weakens democratic norms will depend largely on how political leaders navigate the competing pressures they face. The choices made by potential running mates in the coming weeks and months will likely be studied by political scientists and constitutional scholars for generations as an example of how American democracy responds to institutional stress. The answer to who ultimately accepts a position on the ticket may tell us less about individual political courage and more about the broader health of American political institutions. In a system designed to balance competing interests and prevent the concentration of unchecked power, the current vice presidential calculation represents democracy's immune system attempting to maintain constitutional equilibrium under extraordinary pressure.